Star Trek, From Ashes and Darkness by Heartlocket1004. Chapter 9, Impasse Year 2259. Jim strode into the med bay, before he paused and raised a brow. "I thought I told you to keep him separated," he questioned Bones while keeping his eyes fixed on the two augments. Khan was still standing directly before Asher, though they were no longer touching nor speaking but simply gazing at each other as they appeared to hold a silent conversation. At Jim's words, Khan glanced at Jim, his face expressionless, as Asher looked over as well while Bones snorted, "You try telling him that." Bones jerked one finger at Khan, not even looking up from where he was examining Khan's blood as he added, "I happen to like living." Jim grit his teeth, but strode over to the two augments, momentarily ignoring the young woman sitting on the bed. He stopped before Khan as the male turned to face him fully, and Jim demanded without preamble, "Tell me everything you know about the ship." Khan's expression didn't change as he listed off apathetically: Dreadnought class, 2 times the size, 3 times the speed, advanced weaponry, modified for minimal crew. Unlike most Federation vessels, it is built solely for combat. Jim unlocked his jaw with difficulty as he stated darkly, staring Khan in the eye, "I will do everything I can to make you answer for what you did." Asher glanced between the two, her expression wary, though she appeared more worried for Jim than Khan, while Khan just met Jim's gaze with an unreadable one of his own. Jim took a deep breath, before he admitted finally, "But right now I need your help." "In exchange for what?" Khan countered instantly, and Jim glanced pointedly at Asher. Khan's eyes narrowed, but Jim stood his ground as he offered firmly, "You said you'd do anything for your crew. I can guarantee their safety, all of them." He nodded at Asher, who looked back at him thoughtfully while Khan arched one brow. "Captain," Khan pointed out coolly, "you can't even guarantee safety of your own crew." The two men stared at one another for another moment, each measuring the other, when Asher touched Khan's hand. Jim glanced at her as Khan closed his eyes, exhaling sharply and, Jim thought, irritably. "Miss Sanders?" Jim questioned. Khan's eyes snapped open as he said coldly, "She was speaking to me, Captain. And I was asking if she wished to share it with the rest of us," Jim retorted just as coldly, and Asher almost rolled her eyes, almost. Instead, she turned to Jim as she stated seriously, "If you give me your word, Captain, that you will do everything in your power and beyond to ensure the safety of our crew and a fair trial for our captain." Jim stiffened while Khan pursed his lips grouchily, "Then I will assist you in infiltrating the Vengeance and bringing down Admiral Marcus." "We're not killing him," Jim warned, and Asher pointed out with a raised brow and a meaningful look, "And I never said we were." Jim paused, noting that she had said, "we," and not, "you." He examined the young woman for a moment while Khan thinned his lips between them. Jim ignored the male, however, for the moment as he stared into Asher's green eyes that were so different from Khan's. Khan's seemed permanently cold and calculating, while Asher's were warm and bright, though as Jim examined her more carefully, he became aware that there was a depth in them he hadn't quite noticed before, or rather, a hint at something more in the warmth of her eyes, a warning at the fire that could burn, a fire Jim wasn't sure he wanted to see if he could handle, which was a first for him in a woman. Then again, this was no mere woman. "You have my word that your request will be met, Miss Sanders, if you and Khan provide your assistance in neutralizing the threat Admiral Marcus has posed and in bringing him in to face his crimes," Jim promised at last, adding before either augment could speak, "My word, as captain of the Enterprise." Asher nodded, satisfied, before looking up at Khan. He looked annoyed to the rest of the room, but Asher knew it was more petulance than real anger, so she nudged his side, prodding him to let go of his pride. "Khan," Asher insisted when he refused to budge, "at least do it for our crew." "I refuse to be coerced into doing someone else's will once more," Khan answered, looking at Jim pointedly. Jim bristled, but Asher cut in smoothly before he could retort, "Well, you did wrong this man first, and you killed innocent people in the process." Khan's jaw clenched while his eyes flashed irritably at that, and he turned away from Jim to glare at Asher as he said scathingly in Hindi, "Why do you insist on trusting them, when all humans have done is hurt you?" Jim and the other guards stiffened as they heard the unfamiliar language, but Asher was unfazed as she replied in English, "Not all humans, they're really not so bad, Khan, and you forget I was one too, once." She spoke in Hindi at the end, though her speech was accented with her native British. Khan scowled in response, while Jim looked between them uncertainly, but Asher just continued to look expectantly up at Khan. Her patience was soon rewarded as Khan exhaled sharply, before turning his dark glower on Jim, who stiffened in response. Khan seemed to be measuring the other man, his eyes peering into Jim's as though reading his very soul. What he was looking for, Jim had no idea, and he couldn't tell what the augment found either, for Khan's expression gave away nothing while he stared pensively at Jim. Eventually it became too much and Jim finally shifted his eyes away, breaking eye contact. His eyes landed on something behind Khan, and he called over Khan's shoulder, "Bones, what are you doing with that tribble?" Khan glanced back, as did Asher, as Bones answered flatly, "Tribble's dead, I'm injecting Khan's platelets into the deceased tissues of a necrotic host. Jim frowned slightly as he glanced back at Khan, who met his gaze evenly now as Bones informed them, Khan's cells regenerate like nothing I've ever seen, and I want to know why. Jim lifted a brow at that and he stepped closer to the augment while Khan remained aloof. You coming? Jim asked Khan expectantly, or not? Asterisk 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 asterisk. You want to do what? Scotty's voice demanded over the comms incredulously. We're coming over there, Jim repeated into his personal comm unit as he, Asher, and Khan strode through the Enterprise, the two augments still heavily guarded just in case. Sulu's maneuvering the Enterprise into position as we speak. To this ship? Scotty asked, disbelief still heavily laced in his tone. How? Khan took over as he explained shortly, there's a cargo door, hangar 7, access port 101A, you need to find a manual override to open that airlock. Are you crazy? Scotty demanded, adding in a confused tone, whoever you are. Just listen to him, Scotty, Jim answered, it's going to be all right. It is not going to be, all right, Scotty retorted, you want me to open an airlock into space, whereupon I will freeze, die, and explode. Scotty, please, have a little faith, Jim sighed while Asher snorted. A little, Captain, this isn't like the teleporting aboard a ship at warp, Scotty argued, this is opening a door and stepping out into cold, dark, freezing space. Scotty, Jim said in an annoyed tone, when Asher called, come, now, Mr. Scotty, it'll be an adventure, learn to live a little. Captain, was that a woman? Scotty questioned, causing Asher to raise a brow. That wasn't the question she'd been expecting him to ask. Scotty, Jim began, when Scotty Whisper yelled, Jim, as much as I am respectful of your private life and frankly envious of your success rate with women, I do not appreciate that you'd risk my life to impress yet another gal. Asher burst out laughing while Jim grimaced, and Khan simply raised a brow. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Jim headed down into the airlock first while Khan waited for Asher to finish checking her spacesuit. These are a lot slimmer than I thought they'd be, the redhead noted, gesturing to the slim black spacesuit she was wearing as she placed the sleek helmet, almost like a well-fitting motorcycle helmet, on her head, and Khan nodded once. It is durable enough, he reassured her in a neutral tone as she hooked her leg over the ladder leading down to the airlock, and it will help that the suits are form-fitting, considering the task we are about to undertake. Well, in that case let's hurry, wouldn't want to get cold feet, Asher joked as she clambered down after Jim while Khan moved to the other ladder leading down. What's that about cold feet? Jim called, glancing up as the two augments came down towards him. I wouldn't worry about it, Captain, Khan returned coolly as he and Asher landed beside the Enterprise captain. She is much too impulsive to ever get cold feet. Jim raised a brow as Asher grinned, before he shook his head. It was bizarre to the Enterprise captain how different the two augments could be. Khan made his blood boil and his skin crawl, though the first was more because of what the augment had done rather than based on Jim's actual interaction with Khan, while Asher just seemed like a regular young woman. To be honest, if he hadn't known anything about her, Jim was certain he'd never even have guessed she was an augment. Khan, on the other hand, screamed inhuman in everything he did, even just sitting. Shaking his head to clear his thoughts, Jim stood with the two augments as they all faced the airlock doors. Clearing his throat, Jim called over his comm firmly, Scotty, how are we doing over there? Captain, I wish I had better news, Scotty replied anxiously. They blocked our access to the ship's computer. They'll have full weapons in 3 minutes. Next time I won't be able to stop them destroying the Enterprise. Stand by. Jim frowned worriedly, while Asher and Khan exchanged looks. If the Vengeance regained power before they could reach Marcus, he would destroy the Enterprise, and with it their crew. Asher was worried for both, while Khan only really cared for the latter, but still their conclusion was the same, they needed to get on that ship. Captain, the ships are aligned, Spock's voice called over their comms, and Asher glanced at Jim as he replied, copy that, Scotty? I'm in the hangar, give me a minute, Scotty answered, and Khan muttered, we do not really have a minute. Not now, Khan, Jim sighed, as Scotty informed them, sounding breathless, I'm running, stand by. He really is running, Asher noted, while Khan sighed, he's still slow. Jim gave Khan a look that clearly asked him to keep his comments to himself, when Scotty's voice called urgently, whoa, 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 hold on there, Captain, this door is very wee, I mean, you know, small, it's 4 square meters tops. It's going to be like jumping out of a moving car, off a bridge, into your shot glass. Asher raised a brow at the analogy, while Jim answered confidently, it's okay, I've done it before. Both Khan and Asher blinked and turned to look at Jim oddly, and he took back his earlier thought, they were the same. It was actually unnerving how identical their looks of curious disbelief were, and he wasn't sure if he was relieved or disturbed by the similarity. You've done it before, Asher repeated skeptically, and Jim admitted sheepishly, yeah, I was vertical, we jumped down to the. He trailed off in embarrassment, and said quickly as Khan turned away while rolling his eyes, it doesn't matter, Scotty, he called. Asher grinned briefly before also turning back to face the airlock doors as Khan interjected sharply and impatiently, did you find the manual override? Manual override, Scotty, Jim spoke with Khan at the end, clearly feeling disgruntled that the augment was taking leadership of the mission. Asher rolled her eyes at their testosterone-filled tension as Khan glanced at Jim, who met his gaze challengingly. Men, she thought, just as Scotty replied hurriedly, not yet, not yet. Spock added warningly as the trio stood waiting, Captain, before you launch, you should be aware that there is a considerable debris field between our ships. Spock, not now. Jim cut him off, focusing only on their signal as he called, Scotty, you good? Asher glanced at Khan, who also glanced back at her while Scotty snapped back, it's not easy just, give me 2 seconds all right, you mad bastard. Jim blinked, while Khan almost sneered, almost. Instead, he and Asher both squatted low, adapting a crouch similar to a runner's starter position. Jim glanced at them hesitantly before copying their position casually, trying to look like he wasn't taking their lead. Another flicker of a smile crossed Asher's face before it disappeared, while Khan just ignored the captain. Instead, he reached out, interlocking his fingers with Asher's, and she squeezed them reassuringly as Scotty called over their comms, okay Captain, stand by. Asher tensed, readying herself, and the two men with her did the same as Scotty added 2 seconds later, okay, I'm set to open the door. You ready? Jim checked, and Asher nodded while Khan's lips curved into a smirk. Are you? Khan countered, and Jim paused for just a moment. Asher grinned, before it faded into a look of utmost seriousness as Jim called, Spock, pull the trigger. Yes, Captain, Spock answered after a brief pause, and Asher's eyes narrowed in anticipation as he called, launching activation sequence on 3. A virtual track path with information feeds and distance counter appeared on the trio's helmets, projected onto the clear face visors. 2. Khan squeezed Asher's fingers once more before he let go and Asher took a deep breath. 1. The doors opened and the trio was sucked out instantly while the airlock doors slammed shut just a second after it had opened. Chapter 10. Launch into space. It was a strange feeling, really, Asher thought as she went plummeting out into space, a mix of feeling airborne and oddly buoyant with the lack of real gravity, but also like a dead weight as the orbit created by the two spaceships made her shoot out into space while the energy propellers on her suit flew her towards the Vengeance. It felt like it should be dramatic, with the loud whoosh of wind rushing against her, but it was silent as a grave as she traveled like a projectile through the vacuum of space, between the debris and towards her target. Captain, there is debris directly ahead, Spock called sharply, and Jim noted, copy that. He swerved to dodge the large piece of broken spaceship, or rather, piece of Enterprise after Marcus's attack damaged their ship, while Khan and Asher flew onwards, following the path their tracker indicated. It was almost like one of those car racing games, where you followed the curved paths and the track lines that the screen provided, except, the consequences for mistakes were slightly more dire. Whoa, Jim! Bones called sharply at that moment, you're way off course. I know, I can see that, Jim answered a tad testily. Miss Sanders, Spock called, there is debris directly ahead of you. Copy that, Asher answered as she swerved, avoiding the debris before correcting her path instantly as she followed Khan, and call me Asher, Miss Sanders is too long. Duly noted, Spock said a little dryly, while Sulu called, use the display compass, Captain, you must correct precisely 37.243 degrees. Got it, I'm working my way back, Jim answered as he used his compass and tracker lines to correct his direction. Scotty, you're gonna to be ready with that door, right? There was no answer, and Jim repeated urgently, Mr. Scott, where are you? Captain, he can't seem to hear you, Uhura informed him, I'm working on getting his signal back, stand by. Damn it, Jim suddenly cursed, and Spock asked immediately, Captain, what is it? My helmet was hit, Jim responded, and Asher frowned worriedly, Uhura, tell me you have Mr. Scott back. Not yet, I'm still working on a signal, she replied, his communicator is working, I don't know why he isn't responding. Khan, Asher, Spock interjected warningly, use evasive action, there is debris directly ahead. We see it, Khan confirmed, as he flew left while she flew right, both narrowly avoiding the collision. Asher, you're also going too far out now, Bones warned, and she sighed, thank you, Captain Obvious. Asher, Khan warned sharply, and she narrowed her eyes. All right, fine, I'll be serio, she broke off as she swerved sharply, narrowly missing a piece of debris that had come flying at her face. Unfortunately, in doing so, she was hit in the knee, the impact sending her sharply to the side. Asher, look out, Spock called sharply in warning as her path took her right into another piece of debris, but she wouldn't be able to dodge the impact in time. Asher, Khan called sharply, as he swiftly changed direction while streamlining himself even more to gain more speed, shooting like a bullet towards her. Asher braced herself just as Khan came flying in, catching her and turning them right before they hit the debris. Asterisk 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 on the Enterprise bridge. Spock's eyes widened as they abruptly lost signal on both Khan and Asher. Mr. Sulu, did we lose Asher and Khan? Spock asked instantly, and Sulu admitted as he worked on his console furiously. I don't know, Commander, I'm having trouble tracking them in all this debris. Were Asher and Khan hit? Jim asked concernedly, and Spock answered grimly as he also pressed buttons furiously in the captain's chair. We're trying to find them now. Captain, Sulu interjected sharply, you need to adjust your target destination by 47.3 degrees. They watched as, on screen, Jim's blip shifted, clearly trying to do as Sulu had said, but he wasn't having much success. Sure enough, 2 seconds later Jim stated grimly, Spock, my display is dead, I'm flying blind. The air on the bridge shifted instantly, becoming alarmed, but Spock remained calm as he fired back, Captain, without your display compass, hitting your target destination is mathematically impossible. Spock, Jim bit back, if I get back, we really need to talk about your bedside manner. Commander, Sulu called as he turned to look at Spock directly, his face worried and pained, he's not going to make it. Spock glanced at Sulu, wide-eyed, as they all realized they were going to lose their captain, and pushing aside what Jim's failure meant for the whole Enterprise crew, that loss alone was a huge blow for all on the bridge. As Spock opened his mouth, although he had no idea what he could say, the screen suddenly lit up as 2 blips reappeared to the left of Jim's position while Khan's voice called, my display is still functioning. The bridge crew looked up in shock as Asher confirmed, as is mine, and we see you Jim. Asterisk 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 Jim glanced to the side as Khan added, you're 200 meters ahead of me, and 300 meters ahead of Asher, at our 1 o'clock. Jim quickly spotted the 2 speeding figures to his left, true to Khan's word, as Asher added, cut to your left a few degrees, and follow us. Jim was quick to do as they said. Using his propellers, he swerved himself around in a large arch, manipulating his direction so that he fell in right behind the 2 augments as Asher sped up slightly to fly directly beside Khan. Khan glanced back once to check Jim was following before he refocused ahead, while Asher nodded briefly to acknowledge she'd seen Jim as well. Keeping right on their toes, Jim called, Scotty, we're getting close, we need a warm welcome, do you copy? Asher's eyes narrowed as the hangar door they were heading for remained shut while Scotty didn't respond, and Jim shouted, do you copy, Scotty? If you can hear us, Mr. Scott, Spock added, open door in 10. Scotty, Jim yelled, and Khan grit his teeth, 9, 8. Khan reached out, grabbing Asher and pulling her against him. 7. Mr. Scott, where are you? Jim yelled as Asher wrapped her arms around Khan's waist while he did the same to her, their propellers pushing the pair as one unit. 6. 5. Scotty, where are you? Jim asked desperately, while Khan braced himself as Asher buried her face into his chest, to avoid being hit when Khan manually opened the door. 4. Scotty, please, Jim yelled. 3. Though, if Khan punched his way through, they wouldn't be able to close the door again, but Asher decided that would be a bridge to be crossed when they got there. Hopefully Scotty would get that door open in. 2. Mr. Scott, open the door, Spock ordered, while Jim yelled, open the door. Asher, Khan bit out and she replied sharply, ready. Mr. Scott, now, Spock shouted over the pair's swift conversation, and Asher was relieved when the hangar doors suddenly opened right before they had to crash into it. She and Khan flew in, Jim coming in behind them, and she was briefly puzzled when a strange man flew past them and out the open hangar door. For a fraction of a second, she wondered if that had been Scotty and if the man hadn't anchored himself well enough, but her concerns were laid to rest almost instantly as the hangar doors slammed shut once more behind them. Unfortunately, that meant they lost their buoyancy, and she, Khan, and Jim went crashing to the ground as gravity took over. Khan rolled them in the air in the second before impact, so it was he who hit the ground on his back first, absorbing most of the impact while Asher was held safely against his front. Jim hit the floor on his stomach, and they all went tumbling, rolling over and over as their momentum threw them across the enormous hangar floor. All 3 grunted as they went spinning across the floor, before finally coming to a screeching stop right by Scotty's feet where the Scotsman was sitting, panting, while still tied to the hangar's main console. Welcome aboard, Scotty gasped in greeting, nodding at them as the 3 groaned at his feet. Well, Jim and Asher groaned. Khan sat up with gritted teeth, pulling Asher up with him as he checked her over quickly, his blue eyes raking over her sharply before letting her go, satisfied, while Jim lifted his head and greeted, good to see you, Scotty. Who are they? Scotty asked warily, looking at Khan and Asher as they pulled themselves to their knees to look around swiftly, already mostly recovered from the rough landing. Jim sat up with much more difficulty, wincing as he introduced, Asher, Khan, Scotty, Khan, Asher. Ah, the lady, and her friend, Scotty deduced, before nodding at the pair as he greeted, hello. Hi, Asher said distractedly, while Khan forewent any pleasantries as he stated sharply, they all know we're here, I know the best way to the bridge. Right, Jim groaned as he struggled to get to his feet while Khan stood up fluidly, helping Asher up as she took a moment longer than him to recover. Okay, Scotty mumbled, a little disconcerted by the new additions, well, the man mostly, if he even was a man, which Scotty somewhat doubted. What happened earlier, Jim added, looking to the two augments as he finally managed to get to his feet. Khan ignored him, looking around as he kept watch with sharp eyes while quickly stripping from his spacesuit. Asher was doing the same, removing the thicker suit to reveal the standard Starfleet black combat gear she'd changed into before leaving the Enterprise, but she, at least, had the manners to answer Jim's question. Khan punched a hole through the debris so that we could get through it, Asher answered briefly as she finished removing her suit. We lost signal with you for a while whilst we were trying to get out of the debris clusters. He punched through debris, Scotty repeated in shock, while Jim just nodded once, glancing at Khan as he also removed his spacesuit. The augment didn't even look fazed, just keeping his eyes on their surroundings as his body remained tensed, as though ready to leap into action at a moment's notice. And Jim was slightly perturbed to see Asher mirroring Khan's actions, no hint of the light-hearted woman she could be sometimes left as she looked around with wary green eyes. She's a fighter, Jim realized. No, more than that, she's a warrior. And he had to suppress a shiver at the thought. At least he now had a better idea of how to handle his current situation, Jim thought grimly. Before, he'd been uncertain about where Asher Sanders stood, and that meant he was uncertain how to deal with her, but now. He finished removing his suit as he made his decision, but kept his face carefully neutral as he set down the small case that had been attached to his suit. Opening it quickly, he removed a phaser nestled inside, and, powering him on with a click, he held one out to Khan. It's locked to stun, he informed them as Khan took the phaser and Jim held another out to Asher. Theirs won't be, Khan pointed out, not even looking at Jim as he kept his eyes and ears trained on their surrounding, so he missed the disapproving look Jim gave him as he answered, try not to get shot. Khan glanced back at Jim, examining the other man's gaze for a moment as Jim also watched him, even as he handed a third phaser to Scotty before arming himself. After a beat as they stared at one another once more in a silent test of wills, Khan whirled on his feet and strode off, leading the way without another word. Asher glanced at Jim before she followed the other augment, cocking her phaser experimentally as she went. Scotty looked after them nervously, before also looking at his captain. Jim just nodded at his chief engineer, silently urging him on, and he and Scotty ran after Asher, and Khan, as well. Asterisk 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 on the Enterprise. Uhura turned in her station and called, Commander, I have that transmission as requested. Spock turned to face her from his place at the captain's chair, and he requested, on the screen, please, stand by. Uhura answered as she pulled up the transmission onto the central view screen, and Spock turned to look just as a familiar, elderly Vulcan appeared on the large display. Mr. Spock, the Vulcan greeted warmly as Vulcans could get at least, and Spock greeted back as he stared at his older, alternate dimension counterpart, Mr. Spock.